Today we're going to talk about conversion, and to do it, talk about one of the greatest conversion stories ever. We're going to talk about Paul. No, not that Paul. Not that Paul either. That one. Yeah, you know the guy who converted on the road to Damascus by getting knocked off of his horse. Except there was no horse for Paul to fall off of, and perhaps no road to Damascus either. In fact, the most we know about Paul's life comes to us through tradition, research, and the Acts of the Apostles. Not bad sources, mind you, but not exactly straight from the horse's mouth. See what I did there? So we're going to have to look for clues in the texts themselves to see what tidbits Paul reveals about his life. Then, we'll establish just what might be meant by conversion and how Paul plays into all of this. Let's start with the Acts of the Apostles. We know Paul didn't write it, therefore it might be a good idea to start with what other people thought about him and thought to include about him in his life. Believe it or not, there are 3 times in the Acts of the Apostles that Paul's conversion story is mentioned. And of course the most famous is found in chapter 9, verses 1 through 20. Go ahead, look for yourself. I'll wait. Are you done? Good. Did you notice there was no horse? Told you so. But in case you missed it, Paul's conversion story gets brought up again in chapter 22, verses 1 through 21, and chapter 26, verses 2 through 23. Each time there's a light, Paul falls to the ground, he hears Jesus ask why Paul, actually his name was Saul at the time, is persecuting him, and after some time is instructed to proclaim Jesus to the Gentiles. Simple enough, but is that all? Are we to believe that Paul's conversion was done in a matter of seconds or moments? Moreover, what are we to make about the fact that Paul never mentions this story the way it's told in these chapters in the Acts of the Apostles? It's clear that Paul thinks of himself as an apostle. He mentions this several times in his letters. But what of his conversion? Well, he speaks of that a little, but only a little. And what we are left with is a few times where Paul actually speaks about his becoming an apostle. Take Galatians, for example. Here, Paul speaks at great lengths about his experience of becoming an apostle, but we're not necessarily given to believe that this was an all-pervasive, knock to the ground, went blind, and go preach the good news to the Gentiles moment that we're sort of led to believe happened on the road to Damascus. While not necessarily refuting this story that we're given in Acts, we are still left with a sense that this conversion wasn't in fact immediate. So what does it mean to convert anyway? Well, the word itself comes from the Latin words con and verte, meaning altogether and turn, respectively. So when we say Paul converted, we're saying he had an altogether turn from one thing to another. But this isn't the sense we're given in any of the example Paul himself gives when talking about becoming an apostle. The Greek equivalent of metanoia isn't found in Paul's letters. Rather, he talks about his call to be an apostle. In Philippians, for example, when Paul is talking about his life before his mission to preach Jesus Christ to the Gentiles, he talks about how righteous he was under the law, how zealous he was at persecuting the church. But when he considered that was all rubbish in comparison to gaining Jesus Christ, we know that something changed. Finally, in the context of a vision or revelation from 2 Corinthians, Paul begins describing an experience he had 14 years prior, the context of which we are not given, yet the distinctions between the version from the Acts of the Apostles and his story are telling. We still don't have a horse, we don't have his traveling companions, nor do we necessarily have a road. And what does this mean for the famous conversion of Paul? That perhaps his altogether turn wasn't as dramatic as history has been led to believe. Several times within the letters, Paul uses this word call very specifically. And he describes how he has come to his ministry, how he was chosen from before birth. Now don't get me wrong, the choice to stop persecuting the church and start a mission to the Gentiles is no small choice. Yet it is also not too dissimilar from how we might use the word call today, like a call to the priesthood. Every Catholic priest has a moment when they actively choose priesthood. But like Paul, this choice is not done only once. In fact, in this context, Paul becomes a better model of our faith. In all of Paul's letters, he is at some point trying to assure the reader and the church of his authority in teaching Jesus Christ. I once heard that when a priest gives a homily, he often is giving it for himself. If Paul is doing the same thing in his letters, then we can recognize that he is trying to assert his authority and try to tell us how he has actually had a series of ongoing conversions. And maybe this might be the best conversion of all, that his model of daily conversions be a model of converting our hearts. Thanks for watching.